Today we are going to do an ombre lips procedure. I believe that this palette is absolutely suitable for every color type. The girl has a slight asymmetry. I also have a three-way stretch, that is with the ring finger of my right hand and the index and thumb of my left hand. I mainly use a round brush, but sometimes I help with an angled brush. I use them in equal proportions, that is half and half. The movement is done using only 3 fingers. That is, my ring finger and pinky are not involved in moving the machine. Blending movements. For a more intense shade we will use number 4, cherry, and number 5, strawberry. Next, as an intermediate shade, we will use number 1, coral, and for the softest, lightest color, it's number 3, peach. Greetings to everyone. You are on the Hanafy channel. Today I will be demonstrating the ombre lips technique. My name is Zinaida Nazariantz. I am a master and trainer in permanent makeup with over 11 years of experience. I am also a championship winner, serve as a judge at competitions, and this year I became the silver medalist at the World Championship in ULAB. So today our starting point is lips without permanent makeup, clean lips of a young woman. Today we will be performing the ombre lips procedure. It is also known as the 3D technique. In other words, it's a technique that creates volume, transitioning from a more saturated to a lighter color. So what do we have here? In this case, the young woman has a slight asymmetry. This is due to the structure of her teeth. We will try to correct this asymmetry a little, but we know that she will be seeing a cosmetologist who will add volume and slightly correct this asymmetry with fillers. So we're not worried. Everything should turn out well, and we're taking this fact into account. Even though it's currently a cold season, we don't have any significant scabbing, only a bit on the inside, on the mucous membrane, but I don't think that will be a problem. I'm drawing the sketch while sitting, so let's get started. I create the sketch using white paste and concealer. So I always dilute it about half and half, draw the central vertical axis, divide the lips in half, and find the center. Next, I carefully determine and find equal distances using the fillet-off columns as a reference from the central point, and then project them downward, either vertically or according to the natural shape. But in this case, it's a little bit wider here. So we end up with a more trapezoidal shape, not a rectangle, but a trapezoid. And I start drawing it out. I remove the excess. I mainly use a round brush, but sometimes I help out with an angled brush. I apply a thin line, pull it out, apply a thin line, pull it out. My very first task, right at the very start of the sketch, is to carefully and precisely mirror the guidelines outward from the central point, step by step, so that they are all positioned at exactly the same angle. Naturally, I use hairs and paws as reference points, making sure not to include them in the shape of the lips. Sometimes I might twist it a bit, take a look, and open it up for myself. Especially since I know there will be filler, which will slightly open up the lip. In this case, I am slightly including the white roll, because this is a 3D technique, that is ombre lips. Here, this is acceptable. Well, we're at the final stage of sketching. Let me remind you that we had the slight asymmetry. This side here is a bit slanted, and the lower lip is fuller on this side. I pulled it in as much as possible and tried to open up this side as much as I could. If you open the lip like this, you can even slightly open the mouth. If you turn it out like this, you can see that the commissure points meet at the same spot. Everything is correct, just as it should be. And we know that there will be filler, which will slightly even out the asymmetry and open up the lip. So everything is going according to plan, everything is good in terms of symmetry. Let's take a look at which pigments I used today when working with the lips in the 3D lips technique. I chose the juiciest color by combining two shades, number 4 and number 5. So this is number 4 and this is number 5. I use them in equal proportions, that is half and half. This is the pleasant color we ended up with. Next, the intermediate color is number 1, coral. And the lightest shade which we use to color the central area of the lips, that's peach number 3. Take a look at the beautiful gradient palette we achieved. From a more intense to a lighter shade, I believe this palette suits absolutely every color type. These are such pleasant, lively, natural, warm shades. Now let's get back to our procedure. We're about to start the procedure. We will use 4 shades in our work. That's number 4 and number 5 mixed in equal parts. To enhance the area from the contour, several shades are used in 3D lips. This is the most intense shade, which is for the contour and the area right next to the contour, the middle shade, meaning the transition color, and the lightest shade, which is used in the very center of the lips. For the more intense shade, we will use number 4, cherry, and number 5, strawberry. Next, as the intermediate shade, we will use number 1, which is coral. And for the softest, lightest color, that's number 3, peach. For this work, I will use a Hanafy 1 needle. I always bend the needle slightly. I press on the plunger and bend it away from myself from the window, that is from the bevel. For the device, in this case, I'm using the mast pattern with a needle protrusion of about 1.5 millimeters. The speed on the power supply is set to 3.5. We fix the stencil with powder. Alright, shall we begin? I start from the side ridge, not from the center and not from the commissure, but approximately from the middle of the area between the highest point and the commissure point. I want to increase the needle protrusion a little, just barely touching the skin without any primary anesthesia. I need to understand how the pigment will settle on this particular skin. After working less than a centimeter, I check if there is any outline left. There is a light visible outline remaining. I can slightly duplicate it and continue in the same order, moving down towards the meeting point. I can make this kind of grip to form a small ridge with my fingers. And the movements, stitch-like movements, are directed toward myself, that is, toward my ring finger, which serves as a support point and provides additional tension. So I'm holding it with 2 fingers and with my other hand providing additional tension. Barely touching, I carefully duplicate my line. With overlapping stitch-like movements. I'm checking it's not enough for me, so I go over it again, duplicating it one more time. I make a slight outward turn like this, again keeping the tension. I move up a little higher here to make it more comfortable for myself. Very often I walk from the head side, and again I walk towards myself, shaping the line into a thin, very thin hair-like stroke. And I make sure to check every single section, looking to see if I have enough color. Next, when I move over here, I create this kind of three-way tension. When working with the contour, I like to keep it clean and precise, so that this contour line looks as neat and thin as possible. The cartridge window is facing my middle finger, and then I also stretch the skin to create a sort of flat surface when I work with the Cupid's bow. I don't draw a cross at the intersection of these two lines, that is, at this central point. I just try to define this area as precisely and finely as possible right away, so I don't lose it. I constantly wipe the area, making sure everything is clean, clearly visible and readable, and I keep in mind that the secondary anesthesia will make the pigment show up even more. Next, I can grab the lip from both sides in the same way and create a ridge again. Here as well, I slightly open up the lip and stretch it in 3 directions. The upper lip is ready. Now I will slightly traumatize the surface of the lip to apply the anesthesia, not to add color, but simply to create some trauma and improve the anesthesia's effectiveness for the client. Now we apply the secondary anesthesia Hanafy in a thin layer, cover it with plastic wrap, and continue working on the lower lip. I also start the lower lip from the area between the center and the point where the lips meet, approximately in the middle. I try it out, test it. Very often the lower lip absorbs pigment in a completely different way. Therefore, if we use the same pressure and speed on the upper lip, it doesn't mean the lower lip will take the pigment in exactly the same way. Well, here the color is holding well, so we continue. When I work on the lower lip, I sort of embrace the head, making this kind of grip with 2 fingers, and with my third hand, that is, with my ring finger, I pull the skin in a third direction. In the same way, I also form a kind of cushion. In this case, my left hand is almost resting on my elbow, which allows for a really firm and stable fixation. I check I don't forget. Here I need to bring the contour line all the way to the point where the lips meet. When I approach this area, I make slightly quicker, more spaced out movements so as not to over contour or make it too dense here. And I move on further. Again, I take a certain section to work on, let's say 1.5 or 2 centimeters, and from a specific point I move towards myself again. I fixate, determine the point, and from there I move towards myself. This way of working is comfortable for me. I want to draw your attention to the fact that when I work, the movement is done using only 3 fingers. That is, my ring finger and pinky are not involved in moving the machine. They serve only as support and help to stretch the skin. In fact, this is a very important factor so that the whole lip doesn't slide around and only the device works on the desired area. So now we're starting the main coloring process. We begin from the outline. My task is to color the outline area and the area right next to the outline with the most saturated color. I start from the corner of the mouth and color, repeating the process. Outline, outline, stretched it a little. I go back, outline, outline, stretch a little. I'm actually covering no more than 1/3 of the width of the lip. Outline, outline, stretch. I go back to the outline, 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 stretch. I check and see how the coloring is going. It goes on as a soft, gentle color. I repeat this area. Is it tolerable? Great. I'm stretching in 3 directions as well, that is with the ring finger of my right hand and the index and thumb of my left hand in 3 directions. Outline, outline, stretch. Outline, outline. And I blend it out. Outline, 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 outline. Blend it out. Where the color isn't enough, I can go back and repeat it. The pigment is going on quite well. I like the residue. Often, many people can't manage to color the area right next to the outline, and as a result, there's a gap or a space left. They're afraid to get close to the outline, worried they might go over the line and it will look uneven. In this case, I recommend the following. First, transfer a perfect outline. Make sure it's so clear and readable that there's absolutely no doubt you might go beyond that line. And when it's as clear as possible, you simply trace over it and make strokes outward from it, as if you're just coloring the outline with quick strokes. You fill it in and then move away from it with diffusing, sweeping motions. This way, you get a clear, clean image of the outline and the area right next to it. If there's an area that requires a more delicate, precise feel, you can shorten your strokes. So, what's next? Now I've finished the first pass with the first color, the most vibrant one. And here's the result. I've applied the anesthetic, and thanks to that you can now see exactly which area, which section has been filled in. It's about 1/3 of the entire surface of the lip. Now I'm going to move on to a softer, lighter, more delicate color, intermediate shade. And after that I'll finish with an even lighter shade. Alright, let's move on to the next color. Here I'm already using more diagonal blending strokes. While I'm applying the color to the surface, I make sure to overlap the previous shade by using a careful diagonal stroke, which helps to blend the color smoothly and create a seamless transition between the different shades. But I don't fill it in all the way closer to the mucous membrane. In other words, I leave space for the third, lighter, more delicate color. Right now my task is simply to soften this transition from the juicy one. In fact, you can't always work with several colors of 3D volume. That is, you can achieve this transition, gradient or ombre effect simply by playing with density. So, starting from the outline, we have a denser application, and closer to the mucous membrane, the coloring becomes softer and more airy. A gradient or ombre can again have a more pronounced transition, meaning from a dark saturated outline to a very light center, or it can have less noticeable transitions, which is most often requested by clients. Just a soft transition. This is the case when it is very convenient to use this technique for clients who really want to emphasize the outline. They come in and specifically tell me they want a clear outline line. But we know that a sharply defined outline is not relevant in permanent makeup. It's not aesthetic. But this kind of ombre lips technique can beautifully, subtly, and effectively address such a request. The diagonal stroke is quite long and exceptionally airy. It's even more like a gently swinging pendulum. Here we have a coral color as an intermediate shade. Next we'll use the peach color, which is the lightest. I also want to comment that you can make it denser, again a denser feel for a 3D effect, or you can make it softer and more airy. But right now we're doing a medium feel, a medium level of density in the feel. The girl is young. We don't need a dense effect. We don't need a lipstick or super lipstick effect. The color goes on very nicely, I like it. Of course, we all know that after healing, the color will be much lighter, softer, and a bit cooler. I'm leaving just this kind of oval area in the center for the final pass. The idea is to have more of the light color feel specifically in the central part of the lips, closer to the mucous membrane. We apply the color in one main pass, that is working with all three colors step by step, but in a single main coloring pass. In rare cases, if the client wants a denser feel, you can do two main coloring passes. A touch-up, as in any other case, may be necessary. It all depends on what the balance will be, how even the balance is, and whether it will be enough for the client. On the lower lip, I also work using a diagonal stroke. I can say that this technique is currently trending right now. There is currently a very high demand for it, and while at one time almost all clients specifically wanted an even uniform color without any defined outline, now the 3D effect is considered extremely popular and highly sought after. This doesn't mean that it will be a strongly pronounced 3D effect. Although I have had such requests and we did create a very distinct, obvious transition, but I definitely prefer more natural techniques. That's why I love soft transitions that don't stand out or make it obvious that it's a makeup effect. Alright, let's go. The final finishing color. Here we are already almost at the mucous membrane. It can cause some swelling. That's normal. In the same way, I go over the area of the previous color to smooth out the transition. I'm working diagonally. My strokes are softer here, not as sharp as with the previous color. Because here we already have the mucous membrane, which is easily injured and swells a lot. And I need to create this transition to the previous color and the transition to the mucous membrane. I can change the direction of my diagonal. I want to mention that Hanafy lip pigments leave a pretty good residue after healing. That's why I don't recommend making it too dense, like a really solid lipstick, but rather to color it to a density somewhere between watercolor and lipstick, something in between. As a rule, it's generally very hard to see this 3D effect right after the procedure for the simple reason that there's trauma and redness. In other words, the slight bleeding and the characteristically and generally reddened area, so as what is often observed, can simply hide this effect until the hyperemia subsides. That's why it's important to work strictly according to the scheme here. So you go over it once with one color, and knowing at which stage and at what level you finished with that color, you go over it with the second color and finish with the third. Because right now, well, I can actually see this transition happening, but sometimes it can just completely disappear. And it will only become visible after healing, for example. A very pleasant color. I really like this color, the lightest one. The lower lip is also colored. The process of permanent makeup right now, yes, so it turns out that the lip is chapped and it's kind of beaten from the inside. Some people have this happen. I just can't get rid of this layer of skin. But permanent makeup is also, in some respects, like doing a peel, a kind of exfoliation of the epidermis that should flake off. I'm also working diagonally. I'm not rubbing hard at all, just gently dabbing. Touch, pull, but slightly, touch, pull, slightly. This is so as not to increase blood circulation or cause more trauma. The girl's lips are sensitive, but it's important for me to color this area. Another point, the lightest shades, of course, contain the highest amount of titanium dioxide. Accordingly, you shouldn't overuse them either. For example, I don't like very pale colors. This color here is quite moderate. So this isn't a very pale color. That's why I usually apply it with a medium level of density. Alright, our procedure is finished. I think everything turned out beautifully, just as we planned for a lovely young woman. A soft, pleasant ombre lips effect. Right now there's a bit of swelling. We'll give the lips a little break now and then take some final photos and videos. If you have any questions about this technique or the materials that were used, feel free to ask in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.